Black millionaire humiliated at bank. They were shocked after finding out who he was. The sun rose lazily over the bustling streets of Atlanta, Georgia, painting the sky in hues of gold and amber. In a quiet corner of the city, nestled amidst rows of weathered houses and cracked sidewalks, James Walker's world unfolded. The air was alive with the chatter of neighbors and the hum of cars, a symphony of the city's heartbeat. For James, this was home, a neighborhood rich in resilience but shackled by the weight of systemic neglect. James had always been different. Even as a boy, his eyes sparkled with curiosity, his mind endlessly churning with questions about how things worked. While other kids were shooting hoops at the local park, James could often be found sitting on the porch, tinkering with an old radio his uncle had discarded. With nimble fingers and boundless determination, he'd take apart its guts, trying to understand the secrets hidden within its circuitry. "James, breakfast is ready," his mother called from the kitchen, her voice carrying the warmth of love and the fatigue of a long week. Mia Walker was the bedrock of the family. A single mother working double shifts as a hotel housekeeper, she had little to give beyond her unwavering support and fierce belief in her son's potential. James hurried in, wiping grease-streaked hands on his faded jeans. "Morning, Ma," he greeted with a smile, sitting down at the tiny kitchen table where a modest plate of scrambled eggs and toast waited for him. "Morning, baby," Mia replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "What were you working on this time?" "An old laptop I found at the thrift store," he said. "It's a dinosaur, but I think I can get it running again." Her eyes softened. "You've got magic in those hands. One day you're going to fix more than just machines. You're going to change lives, James." Her words stayed with him as he walked to school, the sun now high enough to bathe the streets in light. At Hamilton High, a public school worn by years of underfunding, James found solace in the computer lab. It wasn't much, just a row of outdated desktops, but to him, it was a portal to another world. He'd taught himself to code using free online tutorials and late-night sessions at the local library, determined to carve out a future that stretched far beyond the limits of his neighborhood. It was Mr. Grayson, a wiry man with wire-rimmed glasses and an infectious passion for teaching, who first saw James's potential. "You've got a gift, James," he said one afternoon, leaning over his shoulder as James debugged a line of code. "You ever thought about entering the city hackathon next month? You could win a scholarship?" James hesitated. "A scholarship? For me? I don't know." "You don't have to know," Mr. Grayson replied, clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You just have to try." And try he did. For weeks, James poured himself into the project, creating an app that mapped safe walking routes through the city, an idea born from personal experience navigating his own neighborhood. The hackathon day arrived, and James stood nervously in front of the judges, presenting his idea with a shaky voice but steady conviction. The applause at the end was thunderous. James had won. The scholarship was a ticket to MIT, a place that felt like a dream wrapped in impossibility. His mother cried when the letter came, holding him so tightly he could barely breathe. The day he left Atlanta for Boston was bittersweet. He hugged Mia at the bus station, the weight of her sacrifices and his dreams hanging heavily in the air. "You go out there and make something of yourself," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "But don't forget where you came from, you hear?" "I won't, Ma," James promised, his own voice trembling. As the bus pulled away, James stared out the window, the skyline of Atlanta fading into the horizon. His heart swelled with a mix of fear and determination. He was leaving behind the only world he had ever known, stepping into an unknown future where his talents might finally have the chance to shine. But deep down, he knew, no matter where this journey took him, his roots would always be in Atlanta. In that modest house with its creaky floorboards, in the quiet strength of a mother who believed in him against all odds. And so, James Walker set off to chase his destiny, unaware that he was not just seeking success, but forging a path that would one day inspire a generation. The plane descended through the clouds, revealing a sprawling cityscape below. Boston, with its historic charm and bustling streets, was a far cry from the familiar chaos of Atlanta. James Walker leaned against the window, his breath fogging up the glass as he took in the view. His heart raced with a mix of excitement and dread. This was MIT. The dream that had seemed so distant now lay just ahead. When he stepped onto campus for the first time, the scale of it overwhelmed him. Sleek, modern buildings with glass facades stood alongside ivy-covered walls that seemed to whisper stories of the brilliant minds who had passed through. Students swarmed the courtyards, many of them speaking in rapid-fire exchanges about topics James barely understood. He clutched the strap of his second-hand backpack tightly and pressed on, feeling like an outsider in a world that wasn't built for someone like him. James quickly discovered that life at MIT was as demanding as he had imagined. His classes in computer science and engineering were rigorous, pushing him to his intellectual limits. Late nights in the dorms, fueled by cheap coffee and determination, became the norm. But the challenges weren't just academic. James soon realized how isolated he felt. Out of hundreds of students in his program, only a handful looked like him. Subtle microaggressions added to the weight he carried, professors who seemed surprised at his aptitude, classmates who avoided working with him on group projects. Though the campus prided itself on diversity, James often felt invisible or, worse, hyper-visible for the wrong reasons. He didn't let it break him. If anything, the adversity fueled him. James spent hours in the library, diving deeper into coding, artificial intelligence, and data systems. One evening, as he sat in a study room surrounded by a fortress of textbooks, he overheard a group of students discussing a summer internship at Apex Tech, one of the leading tech firms in Silicon Valley. James applied on a whim, doubting his chances. To his surprise, he was selected. The internship was a whirlwind. For the first time, James was in a space that celebrated innovation on a massive scale. Yet even here, he found himself under a microscope. His ideas were often dismissed in meetings, only to be echoed later by someone else and praised. Still, James persevered, building a reputation for his meticulous problem-solving and creative thinking. During his final week at Apex Tech, James presented a project to the company's leadership team, a prototype of a platform that could simplify complex financial tools for low-income users. He explained how this kind of technology could democratize access to wealth-building resources for communities like the one he grew up in. The presentation earned polite applause, but James couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't taken seriously. On the flight back to Boston, he stared out the window, an idea beginning to take shape in his mind. If no one else believed in the potential of tech to uplift underserved communities, then maybe he would have to prove it himself. Back at MIT, James began laying the groundwork for his vision. He took electives in business management and networked tirelessly, attending every conference and seminar he could find. One of his professors, Dr. Howard, a seasoned entrepreneur who had launched several startups, took notice. "You've got something, James," Dr. Howard said during office hours one day. "It's rare to find someone who can marry technical skills with a genuine purpose. What's holding you back?" James hesitated before replying. "I don't know where to start. I don't have money or connections. And honestly, I don't know if people will take me seriously." Dr. Howard leaned forward, a wry smile on his face. "The best ideas come from people who've lived the problem they're solving. Start small, build something. If it's good enough, people will notice." Encouraged by his mentor's words, James spent the next year developing a prototype for a financial platform targeting low-income users. It was a labor of love, built during stolen hours between his classes and part-time campus job. By the time he graduated, the prototype was ready, but James's journey was just beginning. The day of his graduation was bittersweet. His mother, Mia, flew up to Boston to see him walk across the stage, her face glowing with pride. "You did it, baby," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You're the first in our family. You've made us proud." James smiled, but his mind was already on the future. As the crowd cheered and cameras flashed, he thought about the risks ahead. He had a diploma in one hand and a dream in the other, and he was ready to take on the world. He just didn't know how much of a fight it would take. The San Francisco Bay Area buzzed with energy, a mecca for dreamers and disruptors. James Walker had arrived with little more than a backpack, a laptop, and a vision. Standing outside a shared office space in downtown Oakland, he stared at the building's glass doors. The words "Co-Create Hub" gleamed above the entrance. It wasn't much, just a collection of desks crammed into a loft, but it was where he would take his first step toward making his dream a reality. James had risked everything. Instead of pursuing lucrative offers from major tech firms, he decided to pour his savings into launching his own company. The prototype he had developed at MIT, now dubbed Bridge Tech Solutions, was his focus. The platform aimed to simplify personal finance for low-income families, offering tools for budgeting, savings, and building credit. It was ambitious, and James knew the odds were stacked against him. His early days as an entrepreneur were a relentless grind. Working out of the shared space, James coded late into the night, fueled by vending machine snacks and determination. He cold emailed investors, pitched his idea at community events, and reached out to anyone willing to give him a chance. Most of the responses were the same: polite rejections, skeptical looks, or promises of follow-ups that never came. "Your target market doesn't have enough purchasing power," one investor said during a pitch meeting, his voice dripping with condescension. "I don't see how this scales." Another dismissed him outright. "It's a nice idea, but you'd need someone more experienced to get it off the ground." James left those meetings frustrated but undeterred. He knew they were wrong. His community needed this technology, and he was determined to prove its worth. One day, after a particularly grueling week of pitching, James caught a break. A community organization in Oakland hosted a tech showcase, inviting local entrepreneurs to present their ideas. James was hesitant. He had spent weeks pitching to no avail, but he signed up anyway. Armed with nothing but a basic PowerPoint and his passion, he stood in front of the small audience and shared his story. "Growing up in Atlanta, I saw firsthand how complicated and inaccessible personal finance can be for people in underserved communities," James began, his voice steady despite his nerves. Bridge Tech Solutions is about leveling the playing field. It's about empowering families with the tools they need to build a better future. When he finished, the room erupted in applause. After the event, a woman approached him. She introduced herself as Maria Espinosa, the director of a local nonprofit that focused on financial literacy. "I love what you're doing," Maria said, handing him her card. "We work with families who need exactly what you're offering. Let's talk." That conversation turned into Bridge Tech's first contract. Maria's nonprofit agreed to pilot the platform with their members, providing James with the validation he desperately needed. Word spread quickly, and soon other organizations expressed interest. Bridge Tech Solutions was gaining traction, but with growth came challenges. James faced mounting pressure to scale the platform while keeping costs low. His team, consisting of 2 college friends working part-time and a graphic designer he'd found on Reddit, was stretched thin. At the same time, James encountered blatant racism during meetings with potential investors. Some assumed he wasn't the company's founder, addressing his white colleagues instead. Others made subtle but cutting remarks about his appearance or background. One investor, after hearing James's pitch, leaned back in his chair and smirked. "You're impressive, James, but let's be real, the tech world's a shark tank. Are you sure you're ready for that?" James swallowed his frustration and responded with calm professionalism. "I'm not just ready for the shark tank, I'm building a ship." Despite the setbacks, James refused to give up. Months of relentless effort culminated in a breakthrough, a partnership with a national credit union. The deal not only provided the funding he needed to expand, but also gave BridgeTech Solutions the credibility to attract larger clients. Overnight, the company transformed from a scrappy startup to a player in the fintech space. Articles about James's journey began to appear in tech blogs, framing him as a rising star. He was invited to speak at conferences, where he shared his vision of making technology more inclusive. Still, the success didn't shield him from prejudice. At one event, an attendee approached James after his presentation and asked, "Did you really build all this yourself?" James smiled tightly. "Yes, I really did." Despite these moments, James remained focused on his mission. He expanded his team, hiring young talent from underrepresented communities. He made it a point to mentor them, sharing lessons from his journey. One night, sitting alone in his modest apartment, James looked over the latest user metrics for BridgeTech Solutions. The numbers were climbing steadily, but it wasn't the data that moved him. It was the testimonials from users. A single mother who had saved enough to buy her first home, a college student who improved their credit score, a retiree who felt financially secure for the first time in years. For James, this was the reward. It wasn't about the money or the accolades. It was about making an impact. Yet, deep down, he knew the road ahead would only get harder. Success hadn't erased the systemic barriers he faced. If anything, it had magnified them. As he closed his laptop, James made a silent promise to himself. No matter what, he would keep pushing forward. Not just for himself, but for the countless others who needed someone to prove that it was possible. What he didn't realize was that his greatest challenge and his most defining moment was just around the corner. James Walker walked briskly through the streets of downtown Atlanta, his mind occupied with the details of a major deal. His company, BridgeTech Solutions, had just secured a pivotal partnership with a European fintech giant. It was the kind of breakthrough that could take his business to the next level, expanding its reach across borders. Today, he was on his way to the bank to finalize an international transfer, a crucial step to seal the agreement. The glass doors of the bank reflected the morning sun as James stepped inside. The lobby was an echo chamber of muted conversations and the tapping of keyboards. He wore his usual attire, a simple polo shirt, jeans and sneakers. A well-used laptop bag hung from his shoulder. To James, it was just another day. He'd been in this bank countless times. In fact, he was a VIP client here, a status earned through years of meticulous financial growth. But today, things felt different. At the counter, James handed his documentation to a teller who glanced at him, then at the forms. Her smile faltered slightly. "This is a large transfer," she said, her tone cautious. "I'll need to call the manager." "That's fine," James replied, his voice steady. He was used to procedures, though something about her body language struck him as odd. A few moments later, a middle-aged man in a tailored suit approached. His name tag read Mr. Sullivan, and his expression was unreadable. He took the documents from the teller, flipping through them with deliberate slowness. "Mr. Walker, is it?" Sullivan asked, his tone clipped. "Yes, that's me," James said. "This is for a business deal with a European client. All the details are in the paperwork." Sullivan frowned. "And you're the owner of this business?" "Yes," James confirmed, the first flicker of irritation rising in his chest. "I'm the CEO and founder." The manager's gaze flicked to James's casual attire, then to his laptop bag. He seemed to assess James not as a client, but as a problem. "Mr. Walker, I'll need to verify the authenticity of these documents," Sullivan said. "This is an unusually large amount." "That's fine," James said, though his patience was beginning to wane. "Take your time." But it wasn't just a matter of time. As James stood waiting, he noticed the sideways glances from other employees. Sullivan whispered to a colleague who looked over at James with raised eyebrows. It was the kind of scrutiny James knew all too well. Minutes turned into half an hour. James approached the counter again. "Is there a problem?" he asked. Sullivan sighed, folding his arms. "Frankly, Mr. Walker, your account activity seems unusual. We have to ensure this isn't fraudulent." James felt his stomach tighten. "Fraudulent?" he repeated, his voice sharper now. "I've been a client here for years. My account is in good standing. What exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Sullivan said, his tone defensive. "But transactions like these raise red flags. We have to be cautious." Red flags. The word stung like a slap. James knew what Sullivan was implying, even if he didn't say it outright. It wasn't the amount of money, the paperwork, or the account history. It was James himself, his skin, his clothes, his presence in a space that wasn't designed for someone like him. As Sullivan continued to stall, James's frustration boiled over. "This is unacceptable," he said firmly. "I'm a VIP client, and this transaction is legitimate. If you have doubts, you can call my business partner in Europe." Sullivan gave a condescending smile. "I'll need to consult with security." Security? James clenched his fists, willing himself to stay calm. He had faced this kind of prejudice before, but this was different. This was outright humiliation in a place where his money, his success, should have spoken louder than the stereotypes. Before he could respond, his phone buzzed. It was a call from Andre Klein, the CEO of the European fintech company he was working with. James answered, his voice tight. "James, is everything all right?" Andre's tone was concerned. "The funds haven't come through yet. There's a delay," James said, choosing his words carefully. "The bank is asking some questions." "Put me on with them," Andre said firmly. James handed the phone to Sullivan. "My partner in Europe would like to speak with you." Sullivan hesitated, then reluctantly took the call. "Hello, this is Sullivan, branch manager of—" Andre's voice, sharp and commanding, cut him off. Though James couldn't hear the exact words, the color drained from Sullivan's face as Andre spoke. He nodded repeatedly, fumbling for a pen to jot down notes. "Yes, of course, Mr. Klein. I apologize for the inconvenience. The transaction will be processed immediately." Sullivan ended the call and turned back to James, his demeanor suddenly deferential. I apologize, Mr. Walker," he stammered. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding." James stared at him, his expression unreadable. "No, Mr. Sullivan, there wasn't a misunderstanding. You knew exactly what you were doing." Sullivan opened his mouth to respond, but James held up a hand. "Just process the transfer." The next few minutes passed in strained silence. When the paperwork was finally complete, James gathered his documents and turned to leave. As he walked out of the bank, his chest burned with anger and humiliation. This wasn't just about him, it was about every person who had ever been doubted, disrespected, or dehumanized because of who they were. On the sidewalk, James paused, staring at the bustling street ahead. Something had shifted inside him. This wasn't just another episode of prejudice to brush off. This was a call to action. And James Walker had no intention of staying silent. Little did he know, this moment would become the spark that ignited a movement. James Walker sat in his office overlooking downtown Atlanta, the sunlight casting long shadows across the room. His hands rested on the edge of his desk, the letter from his attorney sitting open before him. The words on the page confirmed what he already knew. he had a strong case against the bank. The discriminatory treatment he faced wasn't just unprofessional, it was illegal. But for James, this wasn't about money. It was about the principle, about holding an institution accountable. More than that, it was about taking the pain of that moment and turning it into something meaningful. The media had caught wind of the story after Andre Klein, furious over the incident, mentioned it during an interview with a prominent business magazine. Within days, headlines emerged. Tech CEO faces racial discrimination at major bank. Entrepreneur challenges systemic racism in banking, and James Walker from success to systemic barriers. James's phone rang non-stop. Reporters, activists, and supporters reached out, offering everything from legal assistance to platforms for sharing his story. His team at Bridge Tech Solutions had mixed feelings. Some feared the controversy could harm the company's reputation, while others believed it could be a pivotal moment for change. James listened to them all, but remained resolute. "I'm not just fighting for me," he told them in a meeting. "I'm fighting for every kid who's told their dreams are too big, for every person who's doubted because of the color of their skin. If we don't speak up, nothing changes." James decided to go public. He gave an exclusive interview to a major news outlet, recounting his experience at the bank. He spoke candidly about the challenges he faced as a black entrepreneur in tech and the systemic barriers that continued to exist in corporate America. The interview went viral. Social media exploded with hashtags like Justice for James and Ma End Banking Bias. People shared their own stories of discrimination, creating a groundswell of anger and determination. Celebrities, politicians, and activists weighed in, amplifying the conversation. James knew he had to channel this momentum into something tangible. He began sketching out ideas late into the night, fueled by coffee and a growing sense of purpose. Within a week, he unveiled his vision, a nationwide initiative called Black Minds, Open Markets. The movement aimed to tackle systemic racism in corporate America by focusing on three key pillars. 1. Empowerment, providing mentorship and funding opportunities for young black professionals in tech and finance. 2. Accountability, pressuring corporations to adopt measurable diversity and inclusion policies. 3. Access, creating platforms like Bridge Tech Solutions to bridge economic and technological gaps in underserved communities. James launched the initiative with a press conference. Standing at a podium surrounded by supporters, he spoke with conviction. "This isn't just about me," he began, his voice steady and firm. "This is about breaking down the barriers that have held back black talent for generations. It's about creating a world where everyone, no matter their background, has an equal shot at success." The initiative gained immediate traction. Large corporations, eager to align themselves with the movement, pledged funding and resources. Universities partnered with Bridge Tech Solutions to offer tech boot camps for underprivileged students. Social media buzzed with stories of people inspired by James's journey. Yet, not everyone was on board. Critics accused James of exploiting the incident for personal gain. Others dismissed the movement as a PR stunt. James refused to be deterred. He poured himself into the work, meeting with activists, lobbying lawmakers, and hosting workshops for aspiring entrepreneurs. One of the most profound moments came when James visited a high school in Atlanta, not far from where he grew up. He stood before a packed auditorium of students, sharing his story. "I used to sit where you're sitting," he told them. "I know what it's like to feel like the odds are stacked against you, but I'm here to tell you, you can win. You can build something amazing, and when you do, you have the power to change the system." The room erupted in applause, and afterward, students lined up to shake his hand, their faces glowing with hope. As the months went by, the impact of Black Minds Open Markets began to ripple across the country. Businesses started rolling out initiatives inspired by the movement, from mentorship programs to diversity audits. Media outlets regularly featured stories about the success of participants in James's programs. Back in his office, James looked over the latest reports from the initiative. The numbers were encouraging, but what moved him most were the testimonials: young people who had landed their first jobs in tech, families who felt empowered by financial literacy tools, communities that saw tangible change. For the first time since the bank incident, James felt a sense of peace. The pain of that day hadn't been in vain. It had sparked something far greater than himself. But as he leaned back in his chair, he knew the fight wasn't over. The system was far from fixed, and there were still countless barriers to break. Yet for the first time, James saw a path forward, a path that didn't just lead to success, but to a legacy of change. The sun was setting over downtown Atlanta, casting long, golden shadows across the glass facades of the city's skyline. James Walker stood on the balcony of his company's new headquarters, a sleek building nestled in the heart of the city. The headquarters of BridgeTech Solutions wasn't just a symbol of his company's success, it was a testament to the impact of his vision, a space where innovation, inclusivity, and empowerment thrived. Months had passed since the launch of Black Minds Open Markets, and the movement had grown into a nationwide force. Pressure from activists, public outcry, and the tireless work of James and his team had led to tangible results. The bank that had discriminated against him became one of the first major institutions to sign a public diversity pledge, committing to hiring benchmarks, anti-racism training, and community investment programs. Other corporations soon followed, realizing that staying silent in the face of the movement was no longer an option. One of the most significant victories came when James testified before Congress during a hearing on systemic discrimination in banking and corporate hiring practices. He stood confidently before the committee, speaking not only as a victim of prejudice, but as a leader who had turned that moment into a catalyst for change. "Our communities are brimming with talent and innovation," James said during his testimony. "But systemic barriers prevent too many people from reaching their potential. We don't need charity, we need opportunity, and it's time for institutions to take responsibility for creating those opportunities." The hearing resulted in bipartisan support for new regulations requiring transparency in corporate diversity practices, marking a landmark step toward accountability. In the weeks that followed, James poured even more energy into his company. BridgeTech Solutions became more than a fintech company. It transformed into a training ground for the next generation of innovators. Through partnerships with colleges, nonprofits, and tech giants, BridgeTech launched Pathways to Progress, a program that offered internships, mentorships, and scholarships to underrepresented students in technology. One of the first participants in the program, a young woman named Kayla Green, epitomized the movement's success. Raised in a similar neighborhood to James, Kayla had faced countless obstacles on her path to becoming a software developer. Through Pathways to Progress, she not only honed her skills, but also secured a full-time job at BridgeTech after graduation. Kayla's story wasn't unique. Across the country, hundreds of young black professionals were breaking into the tech industry, empowered by James's work. The testimonials poured in, parents expressing gratitude, students sharing their success stories, communities inspired to dream bigger. One quiet morning, James visited his old neighborhood. The streets, familiar and unchanged, stirred memories of his childhood, the porch where he had first tinkered with broken radios, the local library where he had taught himself to code. He stopped in front of his childhood home, where his mother, Mia, still lived. Inside, the house felt the same. Mia greeted him with a warm hug and a plate of fried chicken, just like she always had. "You've been busy," Mia said, her eyes sparkling with pride as they sat at the kitchen table. Changing the world, huh? James chuckled, taking a bite of the food that always brought him comfort. Trying my best, Ma. As they talked, Mia placed a stack of letters on the table. They were from kids in the neighborhood, students who had seen James's story on TV or read about him online. Each letter was a thank you, filled with words of admiration and hope. "Look at what you've done," Mia said, her voice soft. "You didn't just succeed, James. You've given them something we never had growing up, a reason to believe." James felt a lump in his throat as he read the letters. The weight of his journey, the struggles, the victories, it all came rushing back. He thought about the path he'd taken, from the boy tinkering on his porch to the entrepreneur leading a movement. A few weeks later, James stood on the stage of an international conference on diversity and innovation in technology. The audience was a mix of CEOs, policymakers, and aspiring entrepreneurs from around the world. As the keynote speaker, James shared not only his journey, but his vision for the future. "We're not here to talk about problems," he said, his voice echoing through the hall. "We're here to build solutions that don't just change companies, but change lives. This isn't just about representation, it's about transformation." The audience erupted into applause as James stepped back from the podium. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached him, eager to learn more about his work. Some wanted to partner with BridgeTech, while others simply wanted to thank him for his courage and leadership. Back in Atlanta, James returned to his office late one night, his team long gone for the day. He sat at his desk, staring at the city lights outside. His phone buzzed with another notification, an article celebrating BridgeTech Solutions as one of the most innovative companies of the year. But James wasn't focused on accolades. Instead, his mind was on the future. He knew the work wasn't finished. Systemic change wasn't a sprint, it was a marathon. And while he had made significant strides, there were still barriers to break, still systems to dismantle, still lives to uplift. As he leaned back in his chair, James allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. His life had been shaped by challenges, but those challenges had forged his purpose. And now he was shaping the lives of others, creating a legacy that would outlive him. For James Walker, success wasn't measured in wealth or fame. It was measured in the countless lives he touched, the doors he opened, and the system he helped transform. His journey wasn't over, but one thing was certain. The boy who once dreamed on a porch in Atlanta had become a force of change the world couldn't ignore. I hope you enjoyed today's story. If you did, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss more stories like this. Leave a like and comment below what you thought about the story. See you in the next video.